Thank you. Let's start. We go back to the 4th millennium before the birth of Christ, and specifically to the 43rd century before Christ. This is when the Egyptian calendar was first established. They call it the Egyptian civil calendar. And why is that? It's because the Egyptians used more than one calendar. One of them was the civil calendar, which, as Dr. Magdi has touched upon earlier, this civil calendar is a solar calendar. But the Egyptians were known to have used other types of calendars. In fact, some scientists argue that the number may have been up to 30-something calendars, but the main three were civil calendar, a lunar calendar, and an agricultural calendar, or something related to agriculture and the days of flooding in Egypt and all of this. But some scientists don't approve of the date, the 43rd century before Christ, and they argue that the first solar calendar or the civil calendar was used first in Egypt in 2781 before Christ. I tend to believe the sources that say that it was in the 5th millennium before Christ. This calendar, even though it was called a solar calendar, the year only consisted of 365 days. There were no leap years. Egyptians had what we can call as a wandering calendar. Why is it wandering? Because obviously the first of Tut, which is the beginning of the Coptic calendar, started to wander every 4 years from the brightest appearance of Sirius in Heliopolis sky. We will come to talk about this. Yes, of course. So, as you can see in this figure, this is a constellation of stars, which they call Canis Major. And the brightest star, this is the one that is called Sirius, or in Old Egyptian is called Sopdet. In Arabic, it's called Ishara al-Yamaniyya. These are actually extra-galactical. They are outside of the solar system as we know, but it becomes very bright. So this star, the brightest one of them, is brightest across 70 days in any given year. The brightest it becomes is usually on the 19th of July in Julian calendar, because obviously the Julian calendar is a very uniform and it's parallel to the Egyptian calendar. So the first of Tut used to be on the 19th of July for the first 4 years only, and then it kept migrating. The days kept getting shorter and shorter because the year is shorter than the Julian calendar or the new Coptic calendar by quarter of a day. So it used to be 19th of July, and then in 4 years time it becomes on the 18th of July, and then 4 years later on the 17th of July, and so on and so forth. And this cycle takes 1460 years until the Sirius star is brightest again on the first of Tut, what coincides with 19th of July Julian calendar. Okay, let's keep the 19th of July in our mind. So we leave the 43rd century and go to the 3rd century before Christ. There was something called decree of canopus. Canopus is actually a city or some kind of a port near Alexandria. Now it's called Abu Qir, and this decree of canopus took place in the year 238 before Christ. The decree stipulated that the Egyptian civil calendar will include a quarter of a day so that it has a leap year every 4 years. However, contrary to popular belief, this was not adopted in Egypt. I know and I am aware that many people, even well-learned people in the cathedral and people who give lectures in the clerical seminary, the Kulliyah Clericia, I have read many books, as you may tell, they argue that the decree of canopus was adopted then. No, it wasn't. No, and we will know why very shortly because I have researched this over and over again.
Question, Ya Fadi, if you don't mind.
Of course, yes, please.
Was this discrepancy solved by الكوجي الشهر الصغير أو النسيء?
That's right, yes. Thank you, Dr. Magdi. So apparently the Egyptian civil year was composed of 365 days, as we said. 360 days of them were the proper days of the year, and the 5 extra days were called epigomenal, which were celebratory. So obviously, because it was only 5 days, it kept repeating without any addition to a 6th day. But as Dr. Magdi asks the right question, the 6th day was added every 4 years, but not in the 3rd century. And why is that? It is said that the Alexandrian priests may have agreed to the decree of canopus, but it was not generalized all over Egypt or in the Egyptian civil calendar. Egyptians at the time were using 2 types of numbering or dates. One of them is the 1st of Tut, 2nd of Tut, 3rd of Tut, etc., until we come, as Dr. Magdi says, the small month or Nasi, 5 days. Or they used to actually refer to the seasons as inundation season. Harvest was the 3rd one, al-Hasad.
الزراعة حبيبي.
نعم.
الزراعة.
زراعة maybe.
Eating, sowing the seeds.
Yes, maybe that's right. Maybe plantation or sowing seeds, seed sowing. Yes, maybe that is the second. They used to, obviously, each one of those seasons consisted of 3 months. They used to say 1 Akhet the first, 2 Akhet first, 3 Akhet first, 1461 years according to the Egyptian civil calendar. Okay, but the most important point in this is that 1 Akhet the first, or the season of inundation, the first day, which coincided with the first of Tut in the year 238 before Christ, coincided with what would have been the 22nd of October in the Julian calendar. So this in itself is evidence that the degree of canopus was not adopted in Egypt as a whole. How come? Let us go to the next slide. So in the 1st century before Christ, an Egyptian scientist by the name of Sosigenes created the Julian calendar based upon the request of Julius Caesar. And the Romans at that time had a very messy lunar calendar. But on the request of Julius Caesar, Sosigenes, the Egyptian scientist, created the Julian calendar, and it was first used in the year 45 before Christ. 20 years later, Octavius, or sometimes he is called Augustus Caesar, he decreed for the Egyptian calendar to adopt the leap year. So that was in the year 25 before Christ. Why am I confident that this is the date as opposed to the degree of canopus? Because we will see that the first of Tut falls on the 29th of August in the year 25 before Christ. So that is the right date. So the bottom line is the Coptic leap year came used in the 1st century in the year 25 before Christ. The length of the year is 365 days and a quarter, which means that there is a leap year every 4 years. And as Dr. Magdi said, this was solved by adding a 6th day to the 5 days of the small month at the end of the year.
May I ask a question, Dr. Fadi, please?
Yes, please, Dr. Magdi, yes.
دلوقتي you said on which basis the Coptic months were calculated. Were they randomly given the number of 30, or were they lunar, coinciding with the cycle of the moon? So before all this baklava has come in, were the Coptic month or the old Egyptian month consistent of 30 days irrespective, or were they like the Muslim year, lunar? And if it is not lunar, how did they come to the conclusion that it should be 30 days?
Thank you, Dr. Magdi. That is a very, very good question. Now, I don't claim to know the full answer, but in short, we can say that the Egyptian civil calendar or the Alexandrian calendar is a solar calendar, and all the months consisted of 30 days from its inception. However, as you rightly say, in fact, they associated the solar calendar with the lunar calendar, so that in specific years, the 1st of Tut, as I believe, or maybe the 1st of Nasi, I can't remember exactly, and that's why I don't want to give any false information, coincides with the appearance of the crescent. So they associated both calendars together. How and why and when exactly, I am sorry, I have to I have to confess that I don't know the full answer to that. Just one last point to add in the 1st century before Christ, because it will help us when we go further and talk about the recent adoptions of the new calendars, namely the Gregorian calendar. The 25th of March, Julian, was chosen arbitrarily by Julius Caesar to be called the equinox. So basically, the numbering of days and the months' names have changed over the years, even in the Julian calendar, not just the Gregorian calendar later. But Julius Caesar chose the 25th of March because I think it meant something to him, or it was his feast or something like this. So it was...
Here, many people do not know what is the equinox.
Okay. Equinox itself, it's a Latin word, basically refers to the day of the year where the length of the night equals the length of the day. However, this doesn't happen only on the 25th of March. This also happens 6 months later on the 23rd or 24th of September. So there are 2 days in each year, whether you live in the northern part of the hemisphere or the southern part of the hemisphere, where the length of the day is equal to the length of the night approximately. There is never ever a country in the world or any region in the world where the night will ever be 12 hours exactly and the day will be 12 hours exactly. There is no such a thing. It's an arbitrary point. This actually doesn't mean anything because astronomically and scientifically speaking, in Egypt, the day of the equinox is not the same as in Britain. It's not the same like in Italy, and definitely it's not the same like South Africa or Australia, even though they are in their autumn. We are in our spring. Still, the day is not the same. We jump ahead to the 2nd century after the birth of Christ. Christians in every church in the world, we were all one. Christians were basically all of the same dogma and the same belief, but the practices were different across the churches. But basically, the faith was one faith. So it is easy to understand that Christians all over the world celebrated the Feast of Resurrection differently on different days. And that initiated the Pope of the Church of Rome to request the Egyptians and obviously Pope Demetrius, the vine dresser, the head of the Coptic Church, to come up with some kind of a solution or a formula to unify the celebration of the Feast of Resurrection. I intentionally don't want to use the word Easter because I am aware that Easter refers to
a pagan goddess.
They just use the name until this day to remove or convert a pagan feast to a Christian feast, which is very nice, obviously, and it's a very valued approach, but I would like to use the Feast of Resurrection. So Pope Demetrius, the vine dresser, came up with the formula of the apokty calculation in the 2nd century after the birth of Christ. And in doing so, he changed some of the order of the fasts in the Coptic Church. The Copts used to celebrate the Feast of Theophany on the 11th of October, and they used to start the Great Lent on the 2nd day, as per what has happened to Jesus when he was on earth. But since Pope Demetrius used the apokty calculation, the Feast of Resurrection had become a movable feast, and therefore the Great Lent had shifted from the 2nd day of the Feast of Theophany.
Just I want to add a little point here,
Yes.
Fadi.
Please.
Originally, we used to fast the Lent and then have a break and start the Holy Week and then the Easter. So it was a bit of interruption. So eventually the Holy Week joined the Lent, and this is what we are following now. But beforehand, we used to start the Lent after the Theophany, as you said, for 40 days and then have a little break for 1 or 2 weeks and then start the Holy Week. فكان مش مناسب قوي ان يبقى في صيام وبعدين عيد صغير وبعد كده اسبوع الام وبعدين عيد كبير. Eventually the Lent joined the good week or the Holy Week, ending in the Easter. Sorry, ya Habib.
No, I cannot thank you enough, Dr. Magdi. Thank you. Yeah, that's a nice point. Thank you for your addition. I hope it is clear to everyone else, not just to Dr. Magdi. Okay, so what else in the 2nd century? What happened was, after the apokty calculation was established by Pope Demetrius the vine dresser, unfortunately, other churches, especially Rome and Antioch, they both approved of it, but did not use it at the time. We jump ahead to the 4th century. The equinox had shifted to the 21st of March. I am not going to bore you with details because this is a very detailed topic. So the equinox, because we are looking at the length of the day versus the length of the night, these seasonal dates change relative to the solar year. These are actually tropical dates or seasonal dates. So in the tropical year, like for example, the Persian year, they are very, very, very precise when they calculate their equinoxes, solstices. But our forefathers, our Coptic Church, did actually understand this. They were scientific enough at the time. I get some things in the chat. I don't want to ignore anyone. Thanks for whoever is giving me those points. So our forefathers knew and learned of the shifting of the days relative to the solar year. So the equinox had already shifted by 4 days from the 1st century before Christ until the 4th century after Christ to the 21st of March. And the Council of Nicaea was held in the 4th century in the year 325 after Christ. What did the Council of Nicaea stipulate? 3 conditions that have to all be fulfilled for working out the date of the Feast of the Resurrection. It has to come on a Sunday. It has to be after the 21st of March, it has to be after the 14th of Nisan. The 14th of Nisan is the time of the slaughtering of the lamb according to the lunar Jewish calendar.
The Passover.
The Passover, yes, thank you. We have nothing to do with the lunar calendar or the Jewish calendar. So, the 14th of Nisan was actually calculated through the apokty calculation, using what is called metonic cycle. Because the metonic cycle is also used by the Jews, the apokty calculation never, ever, and I am very confident of what I'm saying. I have access to the resurrection festal letters and homilies of Pope Athanasius, and I studied the dates of Feast of the Resurrection from the 6th century onwards. The apokty calculation, I am confident in saying, has never ever deviated from these three conditions. But let us be very clear, the 21st of March was set by the Coptic forefathers to be an ecclesiastical equinox. So the earliest that the date of Feast of Resurrection can fall on is the 26th of Baramhat, and it spans across a period of 35 days. So the latest day is the 30th of Baramuda, and it has never ever deviated. I cannot stress that enough. We will stick to the 4th century. After the Council of Nicaea, or during the Council of Nicaea, I don't know if there is any specific date, Constantine, the Roman emperor, reached out to all the churches in the empire, decreeing that they follow the Coptic Pope. And thank you for the person, I can't remember who put this in the chat. The Coptic Pope has been called an ecumenical, is that the right term I'm using? I hope it is. Yes, the ecumenical Pope. Or basically it is because obviously he sends out the date to other churches, so he has become known as such.
هذه اللي هي المسكوني.
مسكوني, أيوة, شكرا. I know the word, but I didn't know it referred to the Coptic Pope himself rather than a council. So yeah, the Coptic Pope was called Ecumenical Pope. Thank you for this new piece of knowledge. I am really grateful. However, the Church of Rome, with a few other Western churches, did not adopt the apokty calculation or the metonic cycle, and they kept using other cycles, even though Constantine was the Roman emperor. The Church of Rome had so much authority in those days even, and they didn't listen to the emperor. But also there is another reason. I don't know if you will be surprised to hear or not, but the Roman civilization, as opposed to the Egyptian or the Greek civilization, were, I am sorry to say, I don't know how do I put this politely, but they were rubbish. They were rubbish in calendrical sciences. The Celtic Church in the British Isles did not use the Roman date until after. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Because by the 10th century, all those, I think the Celtic Church may have been one of the latest, like in the 8th or 9th century, started to follow the Coptic Pope. But yes, across the ages, they started one by one to follow the Coptic Pope. But what I was going to say is the Roman civilization kept the equinox to be the 25th of March because they believed that they are just following their ancestors. Julius Caesar. They didn't even believe in the astronomical fact of the shifting of the dates of the equinox. In the 4th century, after the Council of Nicaea, please bear this in mind. It's a very important point. Either a decade or 3 decades after the Council of Nicaea, the Church of Rome created Christmas. It was not in the Council of Nicaea. The Coptic Church did not even agree to the Feast of Nativity, as we call it now, but the Church of Rome just created it either in the 4th decade or the 6th decade of the 4th century. I cannot find any solid sources to tell me a fixed date. It was not until the 5th century that the Coptic Church adopted the Feast of Nativity for the first time in the year 149 of the martyrs or 432 after Christ. And obviously, I believe that is a good move, a good approach, because at the end of the day, we were all one church. The resistance was initially because the Copts did not want Christ to be considered as an emperor or a king where you do celebratory birthdays and all of this. That was their stance initially, but 80 or 90 years or however long after the 4th or the 6th decade of the 4th century, they have finally agreed to adopt the Feast of Nativity. Is somebody raising their hands?
Yes, it is Nia Fadi.
Sorry, Dr. Magdi, please go on.
I want just to refer to the Christmas and
yes.
Thing to celebrate it. In real fact, the whole world was celebrating what is called أعياد الظهور الإلهي.
Yes, yes.
Or the Theophany.
Yes.
And this includes 3 feasts. One of them is the baptism and the other one is the Magus. Many people are astonished what is the relation between the Magus and the Theophany. الناس هنا they think that Theophany is only for the wise men, because the church originally said these are the feast of the manifestation of the Lord to the Gentiles. Christ has manifested himself as a servant on Theophany أو في المعمودية لما الآب قال this is my beloved son, and also when the three Magus came they declared his godhood and his priesthood and his kingdom. فكانوا العيد الميلاد ما كانش له ذكر. They were acknowledging only the baptism and the Magus. Then because there was a pagan feast around the Christmas time, and usually the church tried to direct the attention of the people away from this pagan feast, and this happened also with the commemoration of the Archangel Michael. There is originally a pagan feast and then they change it. So they decided to make this a commemoration for the birth of Christ, because the birth of Christ nobody knows for sure when it happened. So they have chosen the end of the longest nights of the year and the beginning of the longer daytime to designate the birth of Christ. And this is the origin of the Christmas. وعشان كده احنا في الكنيسة عندنا شهر كياك، واحتفال كياك أقدم من صوم الميلاد. صوم الميلاد ما بيحصلش فيه أي تغيير في الطقس ولا في الألحان في بدايته، إنما بتحصل في بداية كياك لأن كياك أقدم منه. سوري للإطالة يا حبيبي.
No, I cannot thank you enough. هتيجي تتكلم بدالي بقى. I am very happy, and I thought that I was actually going too deep. And in fact, you reminded me of some very important point. In the 4th century, we said that the equinox has shifted to the 21st of March. And then we said that the Church of Rome was stubborn and didn't actually adopt that date because they were still believing in the 25th of March rather than the 21st of March, because they were only following their ancestor, who was Julius Caesar. Okay? As Dr. Magdi says, astronomically speaking, the 25th of December has been no longer the winter solstice, but the Roman civilization did not know this because they are rubbish. They don't know calendrical sciences, and the pagans and the emperors in the Roman Empire were still celebrating the 25th of December every year, even though astronomically speaking the winter solstice, where the longest night ceases to happen and the day starts to lengthen, has shifted in the 4th century to the 21st of December. 21st of December, not the 25th of December. So thank you very much, Dr. Magdi. There are no words to express how to thank you, because that was one of the other reasons why the Coptic Church didn't actually agree, because it was astronomically flawed. The whole science behind this whole creation of what is called Christmas was flawed, scientifically flawed. Then, as Dr. Magdi says, our church adopted this in the 5th century, which I think it's a good approach and a good move. So the 25th of December in the 5th century was used as 29th of Kiyah, which makes sense. And we know in the 6th century there was a monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus in the Roman Church who advised the Church of Rome that the Coptic Church is the precise calculation and got rid of all the tables or whatever they were using. He adopted the metonic cycle and the apokty calculation. By the way, apokty comes from the Greek word epact. And epact basically means remainder, the remainder of the formula. So it doesn't even refer to any astronomical phenomenon, or it doesn't refer to any dating system or anything. It is just a formula. It's a scientific mathematical formula. From the 4th century or even the 2nd century, when Pope Demetrius, the vine dresser, first established the apokty calculation, it was a formula. Why I'm stressing this out, we will see very shortly. So as Mr. Astil told us, by the 10th century, all the churches in the world were following the Coptic Pope. In the 12th century after Christ, the Holy Fire starts appearing on a yearly basis in the Church of Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It used to appear before, but not on a yearly basis. Why am I mentioning this? Is because in the 16th century, unfortunately, the Catholic Church wanted to remove itself away from the Protestants. So they convened what we know as the Council of Trent, and on the fringes of the Council of Trent, they asked some of their scientists to recalculate Easter. Based on what? Based on the shifting of the equinox. Guys, you Catholic guys, we have already agreed about 12 centuries earlier that it is an ecclesiastical equinox. It is not an astronomical equinox, but they wanted to do that because the equinox in the 16th century, astronomically speaking, used to come either on the 11th of March or the 10th of March. But again, let's not forget that this was actually in the region of Rome rather than Egypt or even Jerusalem. The Catholic Church at that time did not actually believe that the earth was moving altogether. So heliocentrism was advanced 2 centuries before Christ by the Greeks. It has been known for a long time. But the Catholic Church, based on some flawed Christian beliefs, they didn't hold the theory of heliocentrism. And you may know this from history. 25 years after the inception of the Gregorian calendar in the 17th century, when Galileo Galilei, the Italian scientist, developed the telescope further and told the Catholic Church that actually heliocentrism is not just a theory, it is a fact. Earth revolves around the sun. They ordered his execution, but then they خففوا الحكم, يعني they reduced the sentence and they just wanted him to stay in his home for 9 years until he was dead because he was charged with blasphemy. Why is that important? It is important because the equinox only refers to the length of the day and the length of the night. So if people do not understand that there is something called solar calendar, they obviously would change the calendar, and what they have changed it into is a tropical calendar. So in very scientific definitions, the Gregorian calendar is not a solar calendar. By convention, it is called a solar calendar because it emanates from the Julian calendar, which is solar, but it is not a solar calendar. It's a tropical calendar based on the equinox, based on the seasons, and seasons move, the days shift. Last point to say about the Gregorian calendar, they could not make a formula. In the 16th century in Europe, they were that ignorant. They were clueless. They couldn't even give a formula for a Gregorian calculation of the date of Easter. So they only came up with tables. And if one studies those tables, they are full of exceptions. Like in the cycle where 25 comes twice, the first 25 is treated as 18th of April, for example. And the second 25 is treated as 18th of April only if it is followed by so and so and so and so. Or only if it falls within the 12th to the 19th year of the metonic cycle, and so on and so forth.
So now, I would like to ask a question. If those Catholic smart guys have been so fiery in changing the ecclesiastical vernal equinox to the astronomical one as what had mistakenly appeared to them, why then did they not change the 25th of December to the astronomical winter solstice that is 21st of December? Oh, I get it. It's because they wanted to recalculate Easter away from all the other churches and away from the apokty calculation. But as for Christmas, it was the creation of the Church of Rome. So even if it is not astronomically correct on the winter solstice, that doesn't matter because they would not change it, would they? I get it now. In the 19th century, it was the very first attempt by a German scientist to design a Gregorian Easter formula. He tried to do that over 16 years. His student corrected him, so he came up with the very first formula for the Gregorian Easter determination. Before then, Europe, the Church of Rome, and other churches who later adopted the Gregorian calendar, they only used tables as advised by the Church of Rome. And obviously, these tables deviated from the conditions of the Council of Nicaea. So, since the year 1586, 4 years after the inception of the Gregorian calendar, we will find that the date of the Western Easter preceded the slaughtering of the lamb. The slaughtering of the lamb is on the same Roman day of the Passover, but because Copts as well as Jews start their day from the evening of the day before, so we don't call it Passover. We call it the slaughtering of the lamb because we are talking about the 14th of Nisan rather than the 15th of Nisan. The 15th of Nisan is actually the Passover, but the 14th of Nisan is the slaughtering of the lamb. When does the Passover happen? It's on the same day, but it is called the 15th of Nisan because it's after the sunset, in the eve. So it is the 15th of Nisan. In the 19th century, we find that our Synaxarium lists some miracles happen with the holy fire. Some caliphs, Khalifa from the Islamic period, have doubted the presence of the holy fire. So the Coptic Pope, at least in 2 separate instances, one of them was Pope Boutros el-Ghawli, they took the caliphs or the governors in Egypt to Jerusalem in front of a Roman envoy or even the Roman Pope on one of those occasions. I mean the Roman as in Catholic Pope, and they showed them when the holy fire does appear. Last thing, we have some US scientists from NASA
and Canadian scientists from the University of Toronto started to point out errors in the Gregorian calendar as a whole, not just in the determination of the date of Easter, actually some mathematical as well as astronomical flaws. So the Gregorian calendar is flawed on more than one level. We said this when we were talking. Coptic calendar is a solar calendar. Julian calendar is a solar calendar. The Gregorian calendar is a semi-tropical calendar. It's not even a precise tropical calendar. The most precise tropical calendar known to man is the Persian calendar. It differs from the true mean or the true average of the tropical year by only 1 second, whereas the Gregorian calendar differs by about 26 or 27 seconds from the mean tropical year. And that's it, I think. One thing I would like to make clear, as I was saying in the beginning, I started researching the topic of calendars on a scientific basis only. I never took any stance. I was in a neutral position. I didn't think that, logically speaking, some clergymen or some people of religion in the 4th century would be more farsighted and more scientific in their approach than the so-called 16th century scientists, stroke religious people as well. They give them all types of titles. I didn't know that, and logically speaking, I wouldn't have even thought that would be true. But when I started researching and when I started reading over and over again, and I still am because I'm doing some projects on the calendar, I would like to ask you to please trust what I am saying. The more I read, the more I am confident that our forefathers, the Coptic forefathers in the 4th century, did everything on a very solid scientific basis. I shouldn't even say the 4th century, I should say the 2nd century, from the days of Pope Demetrius, especially when talking about the apokty calculation, let alone, as Dr. Magdi told us, the organization of the fasts, the Great Lent, followed by the Holy Week, and then the resurrection being a movable feast, and then attaching other feasts to these movable feasts, and keeping other fixed dates as fixed feasts, and so on and so forth. The more I read, the more I actually feel in awe of my forefathers and of my church. And that's why when I started reading, after coming across some, I'm sorry to say, second-hand or even 10th-hand studies done by some people in the Coptic Church calling for the reformation and the adjustment of the Coptic calendar on the Gregorian calendar, that's untrue. That's definitely not the case. And there is no scientific brain or mind, I hope, that would actually agree to changing from a solar calendar that is being used for generations and generations and thousands of years to a tropical one, which actually proved its own lack of utility. Even the scientists nowadays listed so many flaws, not talking about the religious aspects, but also astronomically and mathematically. Thank you, everyone. I hope I have not bored you or made it very complicated.
A very challenging and inspiring talk.
Thank you.